All right, so I did find something humorous again about a particular company that hired a man to become their new boss. And he started off, but he was kind of young, and he didn't really feel like the employees were respecting him like he thought that he deserved. So he decided to employ a rather old-fashioned technique, but one that he thought would be a good method of persuasion. And he went and bought himself a sign that said, "I'm the boss." And he taped it up on the door of his office. Well, after lunch, he came back and he noticed that someone had taped another note underneath it. And that note said, "Your wife called and she wants her sign back." Oh, dear. Well, a couple years ago, we decided to ride the Hiawatha Trail. And I don't know if you've had the chance to do that. It's very beautiful. But we had some friends coming in out of town, and we wanted to do something together. And so we were all excited. We packed up the trailer. We got bikes together. We got snacks, helmets, lights, everything. We went out there. And in preparation, we had talked to some people about the trip, about the trail. And we were told that to ride the Hiawatha, it was a gentle downhill grade if you start at the top, and it is. We were told it was an 8-mile trip, round trip, easy downhill, and there was a bus shuttle at the bottom if you wanted to get a ride back up. We thought that sounded great. Let's do it. So we got it all together, and we thought, we hadn't bicycled in a long time, but this seemed doable. It sounded like a perfect way to spend an afternoon. What we didn't know is the trip from the Taft Tunnel to Pearson, Idaho, goes through 8 tunnels across 7 trestles and is actually 15 miles one direction. And so we take off, and we were out there, and it was a warm day. It took all day. We did not have enough time. We did not really have the stamina to make this trip well. We were running out of daylight. We were running out of water. We had no food or strength left. We obviously survived the journey, but barely. There were moments when we were actually getting a little worried, and the scout range, the park rangers or whatever, were coming by saying the trail is closing soon, and we're just still trying to make our way. There was one point where we had all run out of water, and we were going through a tunnel. This was actually really funny because we had one of the ladies on the trip with us is a complete germaphobe. Everything, sanitation, everything, and we're out there, but we're out of water. And suddenly we're going through this tunnel, and it was a shorter tunnel, so we could still see inside of it, and the water was leaking through the roof of the tunnel, and we're all standing there with flashlights and water bottles trying to catch a few drips so we had something to drink. Even the lady that was with us, she's like, "Oh, I'm going to die. And she didn't care what germs or whatever was in it. There's an idiom in our culture that says, "What you don't know won't hurt you." But it seems to me that there are many parts of life, many points of life, where the opposite is quite true. That sometimes what you don't know can actually be devastating in your life. This being one of them. What we didn't know about the reality of that trip, could have been a real concern. What makes up your beliefs? When we think about it, where do our beliefs come from? How do we understand this? We can look and see that it's probably a mixture of a lot of things. It's what we believe has to do with what we've been taught, what we've experienced, things that we feel, just even at the core of our being. Our beliefs are comprised of a variety of factors and influences in our life. But how critical is it to know what we believe and make sure that those beliefs are true and accurate? Our beliefs, you see, drive our decisions. And our decisions drive our behaviors. And our behaviors determine our life. It's critical that we know what our beliefs are, why we have the beliefs that we have, and then we live our life accordingly. The Apostle Paul had met a young man named Timothy. And the Bible tells us about their journey together. Paul tells Timothy about Jesus and leads him to the Lord. And afterwards, they minister together and they build a relationship between Paul and Timothy that is probably the quintessential example of a best case scenario when it comes to one pastor or minister kind of finding a young prodigy and raising him up to be the next generation. That's exactly what's going on between Paul and Timothy. He leads them to Jesus. He trains them. They travel together. They serve together. They started and launched churches together. And Paul is working with Timothy, and it's like this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of raising up a star pupil. Later on, it comes to the day when Paul decided that Timothy was ready. He was ready to launch him and to go out on his own, and he sends him to the city of Ephesus like a proud spiritual father and says, I want you to be the pastor of the church there. And he sets him free to be a minister over that church. Well, so Timothy becomes a pastor, and actually several books of the New Testament are instructions from Paul to Timothy as he continues to guide him and teach him and lead him along in his important role. Now, Paul teaches to him many things about things like doctrine. He talks to him about leadership. He talks to him about people and social dynamics and how we all kind of work. I mean, all the kinds of things that a young pastor is going to need to know. And then in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 16, he talks to Timothy on a really personal matter. And he kind of says, okay, this is how you do your job, but I want to talk to you man to man now. I have a message for you that you need to think about, that you need to consider. And he turns it rather personal. He says, you need to understand this. And for the rest of us today, you may not be given the calling of pastoring a church someday. But I think this message is as much for us today as it was important for Timothy in that day. And so Paul writes this young pastor, and he says to him in 1 Timothy 4:16, watch your life and doctrine closely. Persevere in them, because if you do, you will save both yourself and your hearers. I mean, think about those words. Watch your life, your doctrine and your life closely. Persevere. I mean, these are strong words. Be careful. Be clear. Push in towards it. Make sure you know what you believe and why, because it determines the life you live. And it makes a difference between life and death. And if you hang on to the truth, you'll save both yourself and those that hear you and are in the life around you. Think about how your beliefs impact your life. And think about, too, who are your hearers? Who are those that listen to you and might hear what you believe and how you live? For good or for not, our beliefs radically impact the life we live and the lives of those people around us. J.I. Packer, he's a British-born Christian theologian, said it like this: we are cruel to ourselves if we try to live in this world without knowing about the God whose world it is and who runs it. The world becomes a strange, mad, painful place, and life in it is a disappointing and unpleasant business for those who do not know about God. Isn't that true? How many people struggle and are hurting through this life because they don't know about God? So how can we watch our life and our doctrine closely? Well, first off, there's something we need to understand about our beliefs. And the beliefs that we have could be categorized into three different areas. And the beliefs are this, and let's make sure we get this right, because I think it might be helpful if you see it. The first one, and Jerome, just click downward one time. The first set of components of our beliefs is the essentials. The essentials are the issues, the matters of first importance. These are the foundational bedrock principles of life, the truths of God that should guide us in how we live. If I asked you what are the most important things about life, you would probably have 2 or 3 really important ideas or thoughts. that would come to mind that points you towards the essentials. What are the essentials? What are the most important? What are the first important issues? For the Christian, we understand that these are the immutable truths of God. They're dictated by His sovereignty, and He has even burned them into the heart of man, that we would know to the core who He is and the way things are. He wants us to know these things. They're the essentials. Every example of every culture throughout every age of time would understand things like it is wrong to murder, or it's wrong to be dishonest. These are things that are essentials, the core of who we are, as God has created us to be, because they're at the core of the nature of who He is. Now, second of all, part of our beliefs would also be convictions. Convictions are a fixed or a very strong opinion. They have to do with a logical belief. They're very tightly held beliefs as we have kind of grown and learned to evaluate the interconnectedness of life around us, how it should be, what the things that we've determined in terms of where life should be going, how things work, how things should go. I would suggest that convictions have a sort of logical point of view, at least the logic and information that we have to that point. Not entirely or only logic, but logically based just the same. For example, perhaps a person learns about the devastating horrors of human trafficking around the world. And they see the pain, and they recognize the suffering. And they become deeply impacted by stories or images as they learn about what's going on, and suddenly a conviction is born within their heart that no child should be born or sold into slavery for any reason. And perhaps they also believe that is the most grievous plight on mankind of our day, and something just has to be done to stop it. See, that's a conviction that a person might have. Now, the third one is called our preferences. I define that as giving advantage to something. Advantage to one alternative. There might be multiple options, but a lot of times it's based on emotional feeling and emotional information. And I would say that these beliefs are typically based. Often when we believe in these certain preferences, these beliefs are often from the experiences that we had in life. And because it felt so good, it seemed to work out great, it made life seem brighter and better, it becomes something that we really enjoy, and so we kind of give advantage to one way or the other. For example, I believe that raspberry mocha is better than a caramel frappuccino. I believe that buying your spouse flowers is the best way to make up after an argument. Apparently you don't agree. Okay, that's all right. You have your own preferences, and that's fine. In the preference category, there are all kinds of beliefs that are based on all kinds of experiences that we have. And they're often emotional, they're built out of experience. A lot of times what feels good at the moment, and so on. And suddenly a belief is born within us. Now, I bring out these differences because what we need to understand about them is oftentimes we get the essentials, the convictions, and the preferences all mixed up. And it's when we start moving convictions and preferences up into the place of the essentials, it seems to me that we start getting everything all sideways. It seems to me that it would be helpful to recognize how these things impact our beliefs. We get them moved up into the wrong places, and the preferences and the convictions become the essentials. And we can get all wrong. So let me point out two ways this might work. Two problems that go in our lives when we get these preferences and convictions out of place. When we put the preferences and convictions into an equal place with the essentials, I believe it begins to create stagnation in our life. We don't grow any longer. We advocate that area of essentials, and we don't build on those foundational issues of life, but instead we take convictions and preferences and put them on the same level. When we do this, all different things can kind of happen to us, but ultimately what happens is we stop growing because we don't let God determine, we don't let God build into us, we don't let God grow us the way He wants to. When we put them on that same level, what we do is we put ourselves in charge of our lives, and we don't allow Jesus to change us because our preferences or our convictions are in charge. In other words, God's not in charge, I am. I'll decide to believe whatever I want to believe. Either I prefer to believe it, or I put my own information together and I've determined that that's what it is. And I set my convictions and my preferences up in a place where they're equal to the essentials. And now I'm in charge and just believing whatever I want to believe. Where do I get these ideas? Where do I get these beliefs from now? Well, all kinds of areas. Our culture can decide whatever is good and what is bad. Your favorite movie star suddenly is an authority on politics or religion or issues of how life should be. Suddenly, anything you hear and experience, any magazine article, any news broadcast, anything two friends at a coffee shop are talking about becomes a belief in our life. I heard an article on the Today Show this last week. Doctor was coming out with this new book about life and marriage, and she was kind of proudly announcing that they have scientifically shown that we should not expect marriages to stay together anymore today, but what we should expect is seeing more and more divorce. Well, we are seeing more and more divorce, but she believes that that we should expect it to be that way now because people are living longer. That's the rationale. People are living longer, and it's unreasonable to believe that a husband and wife can be faithful to one person for so many years. That's the premise. Well, right off the bat, we know that's not true because it's not what God says, first of all. But as I thought about it, the idea seemed so ludicrous. Because couples don't struggle in the first year, or they do. They struggle in the first years, not in the later years. It's the beginning years that are so hard. It has nothing to do with living longer, because that's when it starts getting easier. We even talked about that a few months ago. And I find that a couple that's been together 30 years or more, they're not ready to give it up and hang in the towel. They're hanging on to every moment they have together. You watch a couple that's been together 50, 60 years, they give anything for one more day. I thought it just didn't make any sense at all. But that's what happens when whatever you want to believe is kind of up for grabs, and you can create any kind of belief you want. It's called relativism. That my beliefs are relative to the situation. And I can choose and do whatever I want to do. Our convictions and preferences are in charge, so whatever sounds good, whatever feels good, anything that comes along and that I want to believe becomes truth. And I don't allow God to guide me. I don't allow God to convict me. I don't allow His Word to teach me His ways. Everything is relative to whatever I think, whatever I feel, whatever I've experienced, and now it's truth, and truth is whatever you want it to be. Now, the second problem is that convictions and preferences actually become the essentials. And we can take in our lives, sometimes we take in our lives, and we let our preferences, we let our convictions take the place of the essentials. And what happens here is it creates division. The first one creates stagnation. This one creates division. We begin to think that everyone else must have the same convictions and preferences that I do. And this is an area where the church has been struggling for years. What do we stand up for? What do we fight for? How do we build the kingdom when people around us don't believe the same way that we believe. You know, for the church for years now, and this is no secret, has been fighting over the issue of musical styles. Some believe that the older songs are better. Others believe the newer songs are better. Everybody has their reasons. Everybody has their thoughts on why. Both sides have their arguments. And so the issue, even today, rages on. Which one's better? But is it a matter of essential? It's a matter that divides churches. It's a matter that divides generations. It's a matter that divides families. But is it an essential? In the early church, there was no difference. There was a big problem there too. It was that created division. And it was stopping them from growing and building the church. Their inward fighting, their inward argumentation had become so severe, they weren't even sharing and advancing the gospel anymore. Unfortunately, that sounds all too familiar for our day as well. In the church of that day, in the early days of the church, they had two groups that kind of emerged. There were Jews that became Christians, and then there were non-Jews that also became Christians. And the problem was that the Jewish Christians were putting their faith in Jesus Christ, but their lives were still extremely entrenched in the Jewish way of life. It was everything about what they had believed, what they had grown up with. It was ingrained in their culture. It was a part of their dress. It was a part of their look. It was everything to them. Their Jewish customs, their Jewish festivals, their Jewish culture, and their Jewish rules dictated all the beliefs of how they lived. And so they were coming to Christ and hanging on to their Jewish heritage, and they believed that non-Jews, when they became Christians, had to follow the same rules. They had to do the same things. And they wanted all the non-Jews to follow all the same laws, all the same customs, all the same rules that they did. Well, in Galatians 2, we find out that this argument over this issue, in particular, it was kind of over what they ate and about circumcision. Those are kind of the big deals. But as they were arguing about it, and the divisions were growing wider, they were actually becoming afraid of each other. They wouldn't sit at another person's table if they didn't agree with you. You couldn't sit and eat a meal with them any longer. You had to divide yourself out of them. They were working angles and trying to campaign with other factions to kind of get them to come over to their side and their point of view. I mean, it was ugly. The fighting had gotten so bad that even the disciples got caught up in the argument and took a side with the Jews because they're afraid of what powerful Jewish leaders were saying and doing. The guys left in charge of the church by Jesus himself were caught up in the battle. And they got sucked into this fight. And so Paul takes a journey to Jerusalem and he talks to Peter and he sets him straight in Galatians 2. He says, I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting God who called you by the grace of Christ. You've forgotten the essentials and you've made the preferences and the convictions the big deal. And I found it to be true that there are people that would rather win an argument than win a soul. Isn't that the way we are sometimes? Sometimes we'd rather change somebody's behavior instead of their destination in heaven. And shame on us for caring so little about the soul of mankind that's lost without Jesus Christ. So how do we build our beliefs on the essentials? That's what we want to do. And I'll come back to this a little bit. I don't want to leave you right there because talking about this can make us really uneasy. Because we say, but our convictions and our preferences, they're so important. So what are we supposed to do? Well, we'll get back to that. How do we build our beliefs on the essentials? Well, God helps us out, okay? Jesus actually gives us some words to hang on to. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. And let's look at this and then unpack it just briefly. But see how this can all tie together. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 24, he says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash." So in other words, if you want to build on the essentials, we look to Jesus. We're to build our life upon Him, upon who He was, what He did, and specifically the things that He taught. If you want to go stronger in your beliefs, then build on the essentials of following Jesus. If you want to live an extreme life, that's kind of our series title, Extreme Living. If you want to start getting your right life, let me say that different. If you want to start getting your life right, then build it on Jesus. Now, it sounds so simple, and it's so oversaid. Don't we go through that all the time? There's nothing new to say that we should build our lives on Jesus. Just follow Jesus. And it's easy for us to say, yes, I know, I do that. I believe in Jesus. I follow Jesus. I know what you're talking about. But we need to recognize what he's saying is to follow Jesus, to know Him, to know what He's like, to try to be like Him in our lives, to do the things that He did, to get those things right. What did He teach, and how do we apply that to our life? To really build our life every day on the rock-solid foundation of Jesus Christ. There's a lot of things that He said for us to do. And Jesus said that we need to not only hear His words, but put them into practice. There's a little conversation going on in here during the week of how sometimes we see people that maybe they've known Jesus for a long time. They would say they're a Christian. They've maybe even been in the church forever. And it just doesn't seem like their life is changing. There's a lot of things that Jesus told us and taught to us and showed to us. But He says, whoever hears my words and puts them into practice, that's what we've got to do. Jesus said things like, be reconciled to your brother with whom you fought. Is there anybody in your life that maybe you need to reconcile with because you're not getting along? Don't look at a woman to lust after her. Turn the other cheek. Jesus said, go the extra mile when you don't want to. Jesus said to not only love your neighbor, but He also said to love your enemy. That's pretty tough. He said, bless those that curse you. Jesus said, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Jesus said, do not do your righteous acts in such a way that you get the applause of men. Don't be looking for whatever, but do good things because of what God thinks, and only for Him. Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. How are you doing on that one? He says, don't be condemning. He says instead, always ask, seek, and knock. Jesus said, whatever you would like men to do for you, that's what you should do for them. Jesus said to enter through the narrow gate and walk the straight path. There's all kinds of things that Jesus said for us to do, but are we living them and practicing them in our lives? We need to build our life on Jesus Christ. And if we would focus there, and we'd spend time there, and we build our life from there, He builds the essentials that we need to have. So can we still have convictions and preferences? Well, we will have those things. And I think we should have those things. We need people championing the fight for human trafficking. We need people who are championing the battle against poverty. We need people that champion the battle of truth and culture. And I think we should do that passionately and courageously stand on our convictions. But we have to do it from a foundation of the core values and beliefs that are built on Jesus. We have to do it from Him. We have to do it as He guides us. We have to do it as He would teach us. We've got to build because it's all about Jesus in the first place. We are only here today, we're only able to worship, we're only able to stand in the presence of God because of what Jesus Christ has first done for us. And sometimes we forget the humility of that. Sometimes we get caught in the pride of that and think that I can live my own life. I'm doing a good job and I know better than everybody else. So the first thing we have to do is be passionate and courageous about following Jesus. And let the other things flow from that. This series on extreme living is a part of the 40 days. And we've only got about 2 weeks left, I think, till Easter. Is that right? Next week's the 13, 20, so 2 weeks. I've been challenging you to spend this time of preparation in devotional time, reading God's Word, praying, loving and serving, putting into practice the things we're talking about. How can we live our life better for Jesus? And you've got 2 more weeks, so the challenge is out there once again to every day spend that time with Him. Spend time in the Word, spend time in prayer. Follow Jesus closely and build your life upon Him. And let Him develop the essentials that build your life so that you're not lost, wayward, floundering, careless, and really walking in a falsehood that can lead to your destruction. Let's pray.